The day I received Yale University's admission letter, my cousin knelt before me clutching her stomach, saying she was pregnant with my boyfriend's child and begging me to let them be together. I nearly laughed my head off. I'd been wondering how to break off the engagement with that scumbag. Isn't it better to graduate from a prestigious school, inherit the family fortune, and become a billionaire? Men would only slow down my money-making. After dying from overwork, I was reborn. The moment I opened my eyes, I met a pair of pitifully pleading eyes. My cousin Susan stood at my doorstep wearing a plain white dress, carrying a large suitcase. This was 1 month before the college entrance exams. My older cousin Susan, a junior in college, came to my house using the excuse that it was close to her school. "Susan, why didn't you tell Uncle beforehand? I would have picked you up." My father pushed me aside, pulled Susan inside, and then settled her into my room. Rubbing my sore arm where Dad had bumped into me, I narrowed my eyes. How did I handle this in my past life? The searing memory came back easily. My pride wouldn't let me give up the room, so I had a huge fight with my father and ended up taking a hard slap across the face. This made my mother erupt at my father, turning their already fragile relationship into a house of cards. Not only that, but afterward, Susan started getting all sorts of inappropriate with my boyfriend Kevin. Unwilling to let Susan take everything from me, I couldn't focus on studying, consumed by thoughts of how to make Susan leave my home and stay away from my boyfriend. As a result, despite being an outstanding student since childhood, I performed poorly in the college entrance exams and could only qualify for vocational college. Later, my parents divorced, and I stayed with my father. Susan framed me for pushing her down the stairs, and my father drove me out of the house. Susan married Kevin, who came from an equally affluent family. With the $10 million dowry my father gave her, after graduating from college, I couldn't find a suitable job and ended up working on a factory assembly line, where I died from overwork. Reborn, I voluntarily gave up my bedroom and moved into the attic on the 3rd floor, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to seize the opportunity of the college entrance exam. My past life experiences taught me that being strong yourself is what matters most. I live alone on the 3rd floor, enjoying perfect tranquility. I study late into the night every day. I pretended not to notice all the little interactions between Susan and Kevin. Finally, the college entrance exams were over, and I scored high enough to be fought over by Yale and Peking University. In the end, I chose Yale. Only when I received Yale's admission letter did my anxious heart finally settle. I pushed open the attic window and exhaled a long-held breath. Now, it's time to settle the scores between me, Susan, Kevin, and my father. As I came downstairs, I happened to see Susan nestled in Kevin's arms, smiling bashfully. Spotting me, Kevin immediately pushed Susan away and walked toward me. "Hannah, you're finally down. You've been too busy studying lately to pay me any attention. From now on, you'd better make it up to me." As he spoke, Kevin reached out to grab my hand. I took a step back, putting some distance between us. "But it seems like you already have someone by your side." I glanced pointedly at Susan. After a brief moment of awkwardness, Kevin regained his composure and said with feigned nonchalance, "Diana, what nonsense are you thinking? I've only been close to Susan because she's your cousin." His blunt words left Susan pale-faced. I curled my lips in delight instead. Kevin and I were united through an arranged marriage between wealthy families, a childhood betrothal set from infancy. That's why in my past life, I always treated Kevin as my future husband, making it unbearable when Susan stole him away. At this point in my previous life, despite my desperate interference, Kevin and Susan had already fallen deeply in love, and now, perhaps because I'm no longer serving as the catalyst, Kevin is still secretly dating Susan behind my back. While playing along with Kevin's act might make Susan uncomfortable, it disgusts me even more. How can I terminate my engagement with Kevin as soon as possible? Lost in thought, I quickly came up with an idea. I gazed at Kevin with affectionate tenderness. "Since I'll marry you sooner or later anyway, why don't we just get married now?" "Married?" Susan was the first to exclaim in shock. "What's wrong, cousin? Don't you approve? Or perhaps, you'd like to take my place and marry Kevin yourself?" The words that struck right at her heart made Susan's lips tremble. Leaving her at a loss for words, Kevin's expression also turned somewhat awkward. Clearly, he hadn't had his fill of the pleasures from playing both sides yet. Seeing this, I decided to pour more fuel on the fire. "Kevin, I got into Yale University. Auntie would be overjoyed if she knew. You really got into Yale." Kevin's eyes lit up. Seeing me nod, his face erupted with wild joy. "Wait here. I'm going home right now to tell my mom." The James family had made their fortune in the coal mining business years earlier. Though the coal trade later declined, their family wealth remained substantial, and they'd invested in various other ventures. Despite their wealth, not a single one of their children had ever amounted to much academically. The most educated person in their family was Kevin, 3 years older than me. He entered society straight after high school without attending college. Because of this, the James family often became the subject of whispered criticism behind their backs, labeled as nouveau riche who lack sophistication. The more one lacks something, the more one flaunts it. Wherever Mother James goes, she brags about my excellent grades. Now that I've been admitted to Yale University, she surely hopes I'll marry into the James family soon. No sooner had Kevin left my house than Susan couldn't hold back anymore. Clutching her stomach, she knelt before me. "Diana, I've wronged you. I'm pregnant with Kevin's child. I know, after all, the condoms Kevin and Susan used had been secretly punctured by me beforehand with a needle." My firm words abruptly silenced Susan's sobs. "How could you possibly know?" With a slight curl of my lips, I said nothing and headed upstairs. "It seems there's a tough battle ahead this afternoon. I need to rest properly and recharge my energy." Bang bang bang. I was jolted awake by violent knocking. Then came my father's furious voice outside the door. "Locking yourself in at home, all you do is study and sleep. Might as well have raised a pig. Why can't you be more like your cousin? She gets up early every day to cook." And, frowning slightly, I walked straight to the door and opened it. Seeing my expressionless face, my father's incessant chatter abruptly stopped. Then, anger colored his features. "Damn girl, how dare you look at me like that?" As he spoke, his hand swung toward me. I quickly descended the stairs, leaving his slap to meet empty air. Downstairs, Father James, Mother James, and Kevin were laughing heartily. Their smiles widened several times upon seeing me. Susan, who was serving tea nearby, had tears in her eyes. It seemed the James family hadn't yet learned about Susan's pregnancy. TSK. Thought Susan was so capable, didn't we? Never expected I'd have to expose this matter myself. "Uncle, Auntie." I walked up to James's mother, Mrs. James immediately spotted the Yale University admission letter in my hand and took it to examine it closely. She then passed the letter to Mr. James and grabbed my hand instead. "Our Diana is so outstanding. I absolutely adore you." When my father came downstairs, she couldn't wait to tell him. Future in-law, Kevin is already in his 20s, and Diana has come of age. Why don't we hold the wedding first and register the marriage later? The James family's social standing surpassed ours. After hearing Mrs. James's words, my father temporarily set aside his dissatisfaction with me and forced a smile. "Of course, that's wonderful. So, when do you think would be a good time for us to set the date?" Seeing Mr. and Mrs. James and my father already discussing wedding dates for me and Kevin, I couldn't help but find it ridiculous. My mother hadn't even returned from work yet. They were blatantly disregarding her presence. Looking at Susan beside him, her eyes were fixed intently on Kevin. Kevin, who would usually melt at Susan's smile, now sat upright, completely ignoring her subtle hints. TSK, in the face of profit, their love seemed to count for nothing. "How about we set the wedding for next month, before Diana starts school?" "Sounds good to me." Mr. and Mrs. James immediately agreed with my father. That's when I spoke up. "Uncle, Auntie, I also want to marry Kevin, but," I said, casting an accusing glance at Susan before continuing pitifully, "but she actually went behind my back to seduce Kevin, and she's even pregnant with his child now." My words sent shockwaves through everyone present. "Hannah, are you mistaken? She's your cousin." I wish I were wrong too, but she told me this herself not long ago. At this moment, the eye drops I'd applied earlier finally had their chance to flow. Tears fell with a plop. I lowered my head pretending to cry while stealing glances at Susan from the corner of my eye. Among the 3 Smith brothers, only my father managed to get into university and married my mother. With the help of my mother's family connections, he established Smith Corporation, but the real power holder was always my mother. My father was merely a figurehead president. As for my father's elder and younger brothers' families, though their lives improved considerably through my father's discreet support, they couldn't possibly compare to ours. Susan had envied me since childhood. I'd laid it out so plainly. If Susan still didn't seize this chance to marry into wealth, I'd have lost all respect for her. Fortunately, this time she didn't disappoint me. Under everyone's gaze, Susan knelt before James's parents. "Uncle, Auntie, Kevin and I are truly in love." Before Mr. and Mrs. James could react, Kevin had already sprung to his feet impatiently. I clearly took safety measures. How could you possibly be pregnant?" With that single sentence, he confirmed the truth of the matter. "Kevin, I don't know how this happened either. Didn't you say you didn't like Diana at all, that she was dull and wooden, that you'd break off the engagement with her sooner or later to be with me? You even said—" "Shut your mouth." Impatient Kevin slapped Susan across the face. The next second, James's father kicked Kevin in the stomach. "You damn bastard, you've disgraced our James family. Why are you hitting our son?" James's mother protested. "It's clearly that slut Susan who seduced him. She's the one who should be beaten." James's mother grabbed Susan by the hair. My dad quickly stepped in to stop her, mad with rage. "Mrs. James even scratched my dad, afraid of getting his face scratched." My dad took a step back, and Susan was pinned to the ground and beaten by Mrs. James. Unable to dodge, Susan suddenly clutched her stomach. "The baby, my baby." A streak of crimson flowed from Susan's legs onto the floor. Fearing involvement in a manslaughter case, Mrs. James immediately stopped and dialed 120. Half an hour later, Susan was carried onto an ambulance. Mr. and Mrs. James, Kevin, and my father anxiously followed behind. I sat on the living room sofa, watching several figures heading toward the door, a cold smirk curling at the corner of my lips. Right at that moment, a gloomy gaze swept over. It was my father. He suddenly turned his head and caught the smile on my face. I instinctively suppressed my smile, then quickly realized I was no longer that timid, incompetent version of myself from my past life who had been constantly oppressed by him. I raised my head and flashed a bold smile at my father. Seeing my challenging gaze for the first time, my father's anger flared up instantly, as if he wanted to turn back and settle scores with me. However, the ambulance outside couldn't wait any longer, forcing him to board it and leave. The ambulance hadn't been gone long when my mom returned, dressed in fitted professional attire with her hair up, though in her 40s with fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She still carried an elegant charm, only her slightly disheveled hair betrayed how hurriedly she must have rushed back. "Diana, Auntie told me something happened. What's going on?" Her tone was brisk, as befitted someone preoccupied with work, but her eyes brimmed with concern. What a pity, I hadn't recognized this care in my past life. Back then, it never crossed my mind whether Mom worked so hard for my sake. I simply thought she only cared about making money and didn't love me at all. I've been rebellious since childhood, always opposing my mother, even when Mom gave up the Sioux Corporation and divorced Dad. Her sole condition being to take me with her, I stubbornly chose to stay with my father. Unwilling to admit defeat against Susan, finally, my disappointed mother left with nothing, completely empty-handed, and went abroad. Thinking about it, I couldn't help but feel my nose sting. "Mom," I threw myself into her arms and hugged her tightly. "Mom, you're finally back." In my past life, I was rarely close to my mother. Since my rebirth, we've grown much closer, yet compared to ordinary mothers and daughters, there's still some distance between us. My mother's body stiffened momentarily before she relaxed, patting my back somewhat awkwardly. "Diana, did something upset you?" "Yes," I nodded, then told her what had happened today. "Kevin and Susan actually got together secretly, and they even have a child now. This is outrageous." My mother fumed angrily. "I'm going to confront them right now. Today, the James family and the eldest son's family must give me an explanation." With that, my mother dragged me out the door. She drove me to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, Susan was lying weakly on the hospital bed, barely clinging to life. James's parents, Kevin, and my father were all in the ward. The other three wore grim expressions, while only my father fussed over Susan with concern. "Susan, does it hurt? Are you hungry? Tell Uncle if you're feeling unwell, my child." Susan stroked her belly with tears streaming down her face. My father's tone grew even gentler. "The baby's fine. All you need to do now is focus on recovering. Don't worry about anything else." "Thank you, Uncle." Humph. Unable to listen any longer, my mother pushed open the hospital room door and sneered coldly. "You were never this considerate with Diana. Anyone would think Susan isn't your niece but your secret love child." My mom practically spoke my mind, saying everything I wanted to say. As expected, my dad also got angry. Though incompetent in his career, he always outdoes my mom when it comes to temper. "Rose, what nonsense are you spouting? I've seen my dad like this many times." But this time, I caught something on his face that I'd never noticed before. Guilt. I looked at my dad, then at Susan lying on the bed. A bold idea began forming in my mind. "You're saying I'm talking nonsense? Susan dared to steal even Diana's fiancé. How shameless can she be? And you're still defending her?" Do you even care about us, your wife and daughter? Susan is just young and doesn't know any better. Besides, she's not an outsider, she's my niece." Seeing that the two were about to erupt into a full-blown argument, I quickly grabbed my mother's hand. "Mom," coming to her senses. My mother took a deep breath and temporarily suppressed her anger toward my father, turning instead to Mr. and Mrs. James. Mr. and Mrs. James, who had been watching the drama unfold, suddenly tensed up. "In-laws, about that, don't call me in-laws. Since your son doesn't know how to behave properly, let's just call off this engagement." Before Mr. and Mrs. James could respond, my father hastily stepped forward. "What a waste to cancel. Why not have Susan marry Kevin instead of Diana?" "Absolutely not." Mrs. James's eyes widened instantly. "Diana got into Yale University, and what about Susan? She went to some no-name college and comes from the countryside. Our James family would never accept such a daughter-in-law. In my opinion, let Susan abort the child in her belly and send her back to the countryside. We'll just pretend this never happened. We can't let some lowly woman ruin the harmony between our two families, right, in-laws?" Mother James glanced at my mother. My mother took a look at my father's livid face. She patted my hand reassuringly, then said leisurely, "That might not be a bad idea." Seeing my mother relent, Mrs. James heaved a huge sigh of relief. "In that case, I'll have the doctor prepare the abortion procedure right away." With that, Mrs. James turned to make arrangements. Susan, who had been lying weakly in bed struggling to speak, suddenly scrambled down and clung to Kevin's leg. "Kevin, how could you bear to treat me like this? Woo-woo." She wept pitifully, her face streaked with tears like rain-drenched pear blossoms. Kevin's face showed struggle. Seeing this, Mother James flew into a rage. "You wretched girl, don't you dare touch my son." As she spoke, she went to pull Susan away. At that very moment, two figures rushed in. "Dare to bully my daughter, and I'll fight you to the death." The ones who burst in were Susan's parents. They had clearly just received the news and rushed over. Seeing Susan being bullied, they immediately pushed James's mother aside and started beating her. James's father also joined the fight. Susan's parents were accustomed to farm work and had great strength. James's father and mother were no match for them. Watching his parents being beaten and howling in pain, Kevin also rushed in. The six of them tumbled into a tangled mess on the ground. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My laughter caught my father's attention. He strode toward me angrily, his face thunderous. "Diana, you've gone too far. If it weren't for you, how could things have come to this?" "Me? What does it have to do with me? Isn't Susan shameless herself?" "Shut your mouth." "No, I won't." "What? Could it be true what my mom said? That Susan isn't your niece but your illegitimate daughter?" As my words fell, my father's face turned livid with rage. "Nonsense. Today I'm going to teach you a proper lesson." With that, my father raised his hand at me. My mother instinctively shielded me behind her. "Don't you dare." "How dare I not, Rose? If you dare stop me, believe me, I'll hit you too." "Ha!" A cold, mocking young voice came from outside the hospital room at that moment. How ridiculous. This is the first time I've seen a father who can't stand his own daughter doing well. I turned around and saw a face both strange and familiar. The young man's features were delicate, his profile sharp, extraordinarily handsome. The abrasion at the corner of his eye and the blood at the edge of his lips didn't mar his handsomeness. Instead, they added a touch of eerie allure. His eyes burned with unmistakable ferocity, brimming with menace. It was Bruce, my high school classmate. After graduating high school, I hadn't seen many of my former classmates again. The reason he felt familiar was that I had coincidentally seen him once before my rebirth. At that time, I was heading home from work as usual when two men stopped me on the road. It was Bruce who appeared in his luxury car. Just a simple honk from him scared those two men into fleeing. When I thanked Bruce, he said, "No need, old classmate." From the depths of my memory, I managed to dredge up only a few fragmented recollections of Bruce. While grateful, I also felt deeply embarrassed. A high school classmate thriving so well, while pulling back my wandering thoughts, I looked again at the face before me. He's not as composed now as he was before I was reborn. Appearing much more youthful, but still handsome. "What business is it of yours? Who do you think you are, meddling in our family affairs, you little brat? Today I'm going to teach my own daughter a lesson." Mocked by an outsider, my extremely prideful father felt his dignity slipping even further. Rolling up his sleeves, he was about to hit me. My mother shielded me in front of her, yet his slap didn't stop. He actually intended to hit my mother too. I moved to block my father's slap, but a hand reached out before me, firmly restraining his arm. It was Bruce. My furious father wanted to teach Bruce a lesson too, but Bruce blocked his hand, leaving him completely immobilized. The two stood facing each other. Bruce looked relaxed, while my father's face turned beet red with frustration. Eventually, medical staff noticed the commotion and rushed into the ward to intervene. Seizing the opportunity, my father withdrew his hand and turned his attention back to Susan. I turned around to thank Bruce, only to find he had already walked away. At the far end of the long corridor, his figure appeared frail. Loneliness lingered. Half an hour later, with the hospital staff's reassurance, the crowd present reluctantly quieted down, except for my father, who pretended to care about Susan while actually remaining detached. Everyone else had tear-streaked faces, disheveled appearances, looking utterly wretched. The James family held their chins high, exuding arrogance. Susan's parents, meanwhile, hung their heads in anxious unease. Their greatest dream had been for Susan to marry into wealth, yet moments ago, they'd pinned that wealthy family to the ground and beaten them. The child in Susan's belly must be aborted. Father James roared furiously. Mother James chimed in. I'd rather die than let Susan marry into our family. That's unacceptable. Father Smith protested. Your Kevin got our Susan pregnant. If you won't take responsibility, we'll make a scene at your company entrance and let everyone judge who's right. Father Smith's words darkened the expressions of Father and Mother James. 200,000, that's a human life. You think 2 million can buy a life? You, Father James interrupted Mother Smith's relentless protest. 500,000. This time, before his words had even fully landed, David Smith and Fiona were already nodding eagerly. Deal. On the hospital bed, Susan cried herself into unconsciousness. It's truly dizzying. Unfortunately, even if she fainted, she couldn't escape her fate of being wheeled into the operating room. After dealing with David Smith's family, the exhausted James parents turned to my mother and said, In-laws, once Susan loses the baby in her womb, let's have Kevin marry Diana. What do you say? My mother's eyes flickered slightly. That depends on how your Kevin behaves. Don't worry, if Kevin ever messes around in the future, I'll break his legs. James's mother pulled James Kevin over. James Kevin absent-mindedly nodded in agreement. His eyes kept darting toward the direction where Susan had been pushed away. Without chatting much with James's mother, my mom took me away. In the car, while driving, my mom asked me, what do you think about the marriage arrangement with Kevin? I wouldn't want that scumbag even if he were the last man on earth. Just thinking about Kevin filled me with disgust, disgusted to the point of physical discomfort. Cheating, cowardly, irresponsible. There wasn't a single redeeming quality about him. I must have been utterly blind in my past life to compete with Susan over a piece of trash. My words eased some of the worry between my mother's brows. So what do you plan to do now? I want to break off the engagement with Kevin. While dragging things out with Kevin might hurt him and Susan more deeply, just the thought of bearing the title of Kevin's fiancé makes me sick. Mom, if Susan gets rid of the baby in her belly, wouldn't the James family just keep clinging to me? I shared my worries with my mother. She gave me a reassuring smile. Don't worry, leave it to Mom. When we got home, my mother first called James's mother. Dear in-laws, has Susan's pregnancy been terminated yet? Not yet. The doctor said they need to wait until she wakes up to check her physical condition before performing the surgery. That slut Susan is clearly faking her faint. Exactly, what kind of decent person would seduce her own sister's boyfriend? Dear in-laws, don't go soft at this critical moment. Kevin isn't infertile. Once he marries Diana later, they can have 8 or 10 children. After ending the call with James's mother, my mom turned her gaze toward me. Before I could even voice my question, she volunteered the information. Kevin is an only child. Back then, his parents went through considerable effort to conceive him. Apparently Mr. James had some fertility issues, so Mother James might not allow Susan to undergo surgery due to concerns about continuing the family line. My eyes lit up with understanding. My mother smiled and tapped my forehead affectionately. Clever girl, this way. The James family won't have the face to pester us anymore. And even if Susan manages to bear a child, the James will still look down on her. Hearing this, I looked at my mother with admiration in my eyes. Mom, you're amazing. My mother smiled and hugged me, gently stroking my head. No one can bully my daughter. Feeling the warmth of my mother's embrace, I couldn't help but feel my nose tingling with emotion. My mom had said the same thing in my past life. How had I responded back then? I said, if you really don't want me to get bullied, you should help me win Kevin back. But Diana, Kevin isn't worth it. I don't care if it's worth it or not. I just love him. I was like a woman possessed, my sole desire being to separate Susan and Kevin. Unable to dissuade me, my mother swallowed her pride and went to plead with James's parents, only to be looked down upon by them, and why wouldn't they? Even after how Kevin treated me, I still refused to let go. Having a daughter like me, isn't my mother looked down upon by others, Hannah? What's wrong? Sensing my emotional turmoil, my mother asked with concern, burying my face in my mother's embrace. I mumbled, Mom, I think Dad, he doesn't deserve to be my father, as if we weren't close enough before. There was always something standing between my mom and Dad. On ordinary days, my mom was busy with work while my dad squandered her money everywhere, showing off. Looking back now, their relationship had been troubled for a long time, but for my sake. My mom kept persisting in staying with my dad, but now I see clearly, a father who doesn't care about me or show me any concern is someone I can do without. I wish my mother would propose divorcing my father, but she didn't. She just held me tightly, and after a long while, let out a sigh. Though somewhat disappointed, it was understandable. After all, in my previous life, my mother filed for divorce from my father a year later, by which time I had already been driven to a mental breakdown by Kevin, Susan, and my father. She had completely lost hope in my father and wanted to take me away, but now, apart from defending Susan, my father hasn't done anything truly unforgivable, though I desperately want to break free from him sooner. I know some things can't be rushed. In the afternoon, my mother went out to prepare for my college celebration banquet. I summoned all the servants in the villa and ordered, throw out all of Susan's belongings. Yes, I had tolerated Susan for a while previously for the sake of my studies. From now on, I won't give anyone the chance to hurt me again. After Susan's belongings were all thrown out, the servants cleaned my room thoroughly, and I moved back from the attic. In the evening, my mother had barely returned when my father came home right after. When he saw us, his expression was no longer arrogant but rather somewhat sheepish. He walked up to my mother, took her hand, and said, "At the hospital earlier, I was just too angry. Please don't be mad at me." Even when he knows he's done something wrong, my dad never apologizes. Now he definitely has an ulterior motive. My mom withdrew her hand, her expression indifferent. Judging by your demeanor, Susan didn't abort the child, having his thoughts exposed so directly. My father looked somewhat embarrassed. Kevin got tested, low sperm count. It might be difficult for him to have children later. This was the only option. So what? My mother stared steadily at my father. Faced with my mother's composure, my father's inner guilt turned to anger. It's Diana's own fault for not being likable enough to win Kevin's affection. Since Susan is already pregnant with Kevin's child, why shouldn't this marriage go to Susan instead? My mother had a tough temper too, and her face darkened immediately. Bob Smith, I couldn't care less about this marriage arrangement, but what exactly do you mean? How dare you say Diana isn't likable? In your eyes, is your niece Susan the only one who's likable? Isn't she? My father slammed the table and stood up, pointing at me. Look at her, wearing that expression like I owe her millions. How is that likable? Unlike Susan, who brings me tea, asks after my well-being, and even, shut your mouth. My mother's chest heaved with anger, fearing she might harm her health. I quickly stepped forward to soothe her. Mom, don't be angry. It's fine if Dad doesn't love me. I still have you. Seeing my concern, my mother took a deep breath and tried hard to suppress her rage. Ignoring Bob Smith, she took my hand and led me upstairs. Upstairs, she looked at me. Your father. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. I squeezed my mother's hand in return. Mom, in my heart, I don't have a father. Since I was little, my father never cared for me, never looked after me, never attended my parent-teacher meetings, never. He wasn't involved in any of the big or small matters of my life. In fact, he didn't have an ounce of affection for me, only disgust. But with Susan, it was different. Only around her did he act like a father. Sometimes I even thinking of that suspicion buried deep in my heart, I gritted my teeth and continued. That Susan is his real daughter, and I'm just a stumbling block who stole her place. Hannah, startled by my words, my mother exclaimed, I can assure you, you are your father's child. As for Susan, your father is selfish. He's always wanted to suck me dry to support his two brothers. Deep down, he believes he and his two brothers are the real family. Treating me as an outsider, he puts you in the same position as me, which is why he treats you. Susan definitely isn't your father's child. Rest assured, if your father doesn't cherish you, I'll love you twice as much. Hearing this, I nodded and stopped dwelling on the issue. Instead, I asked, Dad wants Susan to marry Kevin. Did James's parents accept her just because she's pregnant? If that were the case, Susan would be getting off too easily. Of course not. I know James's parents all too well. They're probably thinking of having Susan secretly give birth to the child. Then have you and Kevin raise it. They asked your father to come back and persuade you, but how could your father bear to let his precious niece suffer such humiliation? So this time he came back wanting me to intervene, to convince James's parents to let Susan marry into their family. I'm not that foolish. After that argument with your father just now, he probably won't dare bring it up again, after hearing my mom's words. I couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. Mom, you're amazing. Of course, my mom said with a proud look, your college celebration banquet is scheduled for 3 days later. I'll send you the hotel address on WeChat later. These next few days, just focus on inviting your classmates to attend your banquet. Leave everything else to me. On the day of the banquet, I'll announce publicly that your engagement with Kevin has been cancelled. Okay, Mom. Back in my room, I still felt somewhat puzzled. My mother's abilities surpassed what I had imagined. She was so sharp. Could she be absolutely certain that Susan wasn't my father's child? Could I really have been mistaken about this? Shaking my head, I decided to set this question aside for now. I took out my phone and sent invitations for my college celebration banquet to a few close friends. When I reached the end of my invitation list, I thought of Bruce. He was my classmate, yet during high school, I had only vague impressions of him. In my memory, he always sat in the last row of the classroom, either sleeping or playing with his phone during class, and the teachers couldn't be bothered to discipline him. He often got into fights and was constantly having his parents summoned by the teachers, a typical rebellious student. Yet because he was handsome, his desk drawer was always stuffed with love letters, but he never even touched those letters, regularly tossing them into the trash. My interactions with him were pitifully few, yet across lifetimes, he helped me twice. After wrestling with my thoughts for a moment, I still sent Bruce a message. Since we weren't very familiar, my tone remained relatively polite. I'm having a college celebration banquet in 3 days. Would you be free to come? Unexpectedly, his reply came swiftly. Just one simple word, sure. Several close friends are holding their college celebration banquets these days, regardless of how well they scored on exams. That day, as I was neatly dressed and ready to go out, my father sitting on the sofa gave me a sharp once-over, his eyes turning stern. Diana, what is it? My tone was indifferent. Frowning with displeasure, my father said, your cousin is still lying in the hospital recovering. How can you still have the heart to go out and have fun? So according to you, while cousin is still lying sick in bed, how can you have the leisure to drink tea at home? Seems to me you should be keeping vigil by her side in the hospital without leaving for a second. My blunt retort made my father's expression darken. I stayed up all night yesterday and couldn't hold out any longer today. Oh, in my hurry to go out, I couldn't be bothered wasting more words on him. As I reached the doorway, my father's voice called out again, remember to find time to visit your cousin. I suspected that making me visit Susan was just an excuse. What he really wanted was for her to give me a talking to. Pretending not to hear him, I stepped out. After attending my friend's college celebration banquet, I had the driver take a detour to the hospital on our way back. When I arrived at the hospital, Susan was sitting on the bed eating fruit fed to her by David Smith and Fiona. Our Susan is truly remarkable. Looks like she'll marry into wealth sooner or later. What's the use of Diana being book smart? She can't even keep a man. When you marry Kevin, make sure your uncle gives you a generous dowry. The 3 of them were already counting their chickens before they hatched. I pushed the door open at just the right moment and stepped in, but Aunt James just called me and said that Kevin would absolutely never marry Susan. Once Susan gives birth to the child, she'll be sent packing back to the countryside. My words caused dramatic changes in the expressions of everyone in the room. Diana, given how things stand now, even if you marry James Kevin, you'll only get his body, not his heart. At this moment, the smugness completely vanished from Fiona's face, replaced by bitter distress. Diana, you've been fortunate since childhood, lacking nothing. Susan is different. Could you please not compete with her for Kevin? While Fiona was speaking, Susan's face was already streaming with tears. Hannah, for the sake of me being your sister, can't you let me go? David Smith's attitude remained unyielding. Diana, even if you refuse to break off the engagement with Kevin, your father will find a way to make Susan marry him. If you don't let go now, the only one who'll be humiliated in the end is you. The trio performed like a well-rehearsed chorus, alternating between soft persuasion and hard coercion. If it were the kind and weak-willed me from my past life, I probably would have blamed myself long ago. But, what do you mean by, let us off? It's Susan who shamelessly seduced my fiancé and got pregnant with his child. I must have had the worst luck in 8 lifetimes to get involved with people like you. Listen well, Susan, no matter what tricks you pull, I won't cancel my engagement with Kevin. Go ahead and have that baby. Eventually, your child will call me Mom, while you'll forever be hidden in the shadows, at most. Your child might call you Auntie. Hearing this, everyone in the room was left speechless with anger. Bang, the meal delivery auntie who had just entered accidentally dropped a bowl at that moment. Sorry, my hands are clumsy. She fumbled clumsily to pick up the shattered ceramic pieces from the floor, accidentally cutting her hand in the process. Unable to stand by and watch, I stepped forward. Let me handle this. I crouched down and helped her gather the broken shards. After collecting them all, I stood up and prepared to throw them into the trash bin. My gaze inadvertently fell upon the cafeteria lady's face, and once there, I couldn't look away. She looks like her, just like Susan. The suspicion I had suppressed earlier resurfaced once more. Noticing me staring at her face, the cafeteria lady quickly lowered her head and said to me, "Thank you, it's fine." I patted her shoulder reassuringly, accidentally brushing off a strand of hair from her head. Just as I stepped out of the ward door, I saw Kevin. His expression was brimming with excitement. "Diana, this is wonderful. You don't mind Susan bearing my child and are even willing to be the child's real mother. Don't worry, I'll treat you well from now on," he said, gazing at me with deep affection in his eyes. It seems he overheard what I just said in the hospital room. I'm about to vomit. How blind was I in my past life to feel resentful when Susan stole such trash from me? What about Susan then? I deliberately raised my voice. Just give her some money after she gives birth, Kevin said with utter indifference. Inside the room, another wave of exclamations erupted following Kevin's words. Susan fainted again. As for whether she genuinely fainted or pretended to, I couldn't care less. I stared at Kevin with an expressionless face. What I said earlier was just to provoke Susan. From the moment you hooked up with Susan, we've had nothing to do with each other. You'd better relay this to your parents when you get back, lest they keep telling everyone I'm their future daughter-in-law. Frankly, being associated with people like you is rather embarrassing. After saying this, I turned and left without waiting for Kevin's reaction. The day before the college celebration banquet, I returned home with my mother after selecting dresses. We found Susan and her parents at our house. The family of 3 were lounging on our sofa, watching TV while cracking melon seeds. The villa floor was littered with melon seed shells and spilled tea, utterly chaotic. "What brings you here?" I stared at them. David Smith leaned further back into the sofa. "What kind of talk is that, Diana? We're family. Susan just got discharged from the hospital. It's inconvenient to delay. If not here, where else would we stay?" At that moment, a servant came downstairs carrying luggage. I took a closer look. It was actually my belongings from my room. Noticing my gaze, Susan spoke with an innocent expression. "Diana, Uncle said I need a good environment to recover, so I'm afraid you'll have to stay in the attic or guest room." Well, she actually took over my room again without even telling me. I was seething with rage. Just as I was about to speak, my mother cut in ahead of me. "Security, throw this family of 3 out. How dare you? Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the elder brother of your villa's male owner. If you dare lay a hand on us, I'll have you all fired." David Smith roared furiously, yet the security guards completely ignored them. After all, this villa was part of my maternal grandparents' dowry gift to my mother. The 3 who'd been thrown out sat cursing and grumbling at the entrance of my family's villa. I spoke leisurely. "Keep making noise, and I'll call the police." As I spoke, I took out my phone. 911 pressed. The 3 immediately fell silent. They scrambled up from the ground and left with their meager belongings. "Susan," I called out to Susan at that moment. "What else do you want?" Susan could no longer keep up her pretense now. Clutching her stomach, she looked at me with eyes full of wariness and hatred. "Don't you dare touch my child." "Ha," I sneered. "Just relying on a child won't get you married into the James family. What our family values most is face. Only by making sure everyone knows you're carrying Kevin's child will the James family possibly let you enter their household openly. Why would you be so kind?" Susan looked genuinely moved. She wasn't completely brainless after all. Soon, she figured it out. "Diana, you're doing this on purpose. You want the James family to be ruined along with us." "Yes, I did it on purpose. I gave you the chance. Take it or leave it." Not long after David Smith's family left, my dad came home. In the living room, he and my mom had the biggest fight they'd ever had, because of me, because of Susan. Their argument started with Susan seducing Kevin, then escalated far beyond that. My father felt that throughout all these years, my mother had always looked down on him because she earned money, making him feel utterly humiliated. As for my mother, apart from believing I'd been wronged, her greatest resentment was my father's years of emotional neglect. Even my typically elegant and composed mother couldn't hold back her emotional breakdown at this point. "Bob Smith, you're spineless, useless, and downright chauvinistic. If you won't protect your own wife and child, you're heartless and blind. Rose, you're asking for death." My father raised his hand, about to strike my mother. Of course, his slap never landed on her. Mid-air, it was intercepted by security guards. "Beat Bob Smith to death. The harder you hit him, the bigger the bonus." Next, the living room was filled with Bob Smith's screams of agony. I've wanted to do this for a long time. Even if I only ended up attending a vocational college in my previous life, it wasn't impossible to make a decent living through hard work. It's Bob Smith, Susan, and Kevin. No matter what job I find, they'll use their power to sabotage it. In my miserable past life, though I was partly to blame for being blind to reality, I never did anything truly wicked from beginning to end. It was these villains who kept pushing me to the brink. From the moment I was reborn, I wanted to beat Bob Smith to death, but when I actually did it, I didn't feel satisfied at all. Because of my mother, my mother's face was full of hurt. "Mom," I stepped forward and took my mother's hand, calling out cautiously, "Mom's fine." My mother forced a faint smile at me. Only when Bob Smith was beaten to the point of losing his voice did my mother say to the security guards, "Stop." I still felt somewhat unwilling to let Bob Smith off so easily. My mother patted my hand reassuringly. "Tomorrow is your college celebration banquet. It wouldn't be good to let things escalate." And so, I didn't say anything more. Bob Smith was sent to the hospital, with my mother specially arranging guards at the entrance of his ward. At night, my mother's room always stayed lit. Unable to shake my concern, I walked to her doorway and saw her inside, gathering all the photos she'd taken with my father. She paused to reminisce, then tore them to pieces. It hit me then, I'd only ever seen my father's flaws, blind to everything he and my mother had shared. Noticing me, my mother beckoned me closer. I walked over and nestled into my mother's embrace. My mother's voice came from above my head. "Back then, when I wanted to marry your father, your grandparents disagreed. They said your father came from a bad background and wasn't particularly capable." I was completely taken in by his sweet words and was determined to marry him. Looking at how things turned out, it seems I really did make the wrong choice. "Mom, everyone makes wrong choices in life sometimes. What matters is realizing your mistakes in time. Besides," I lifted my head to look at her, "besides, if you hadn't been with Dad, maybe you wouldn't have gotten such a clever and delightful daughter like me." My joking words successfully brought a smile to my mother's face. She looked at me and asked seriously, "Diana, if your dad and I were to divorce, could you accept it?" "I could." "Then would you choose to stay with me?" "Yes." This time, I answered without hesitation. Perhaps my response gave my mother strength, as confidence returned to her face. "After your college celebration banquet tomorrow, I'll ask him for a divorce." "Okay." I held my mother and slept with her. Only when her breathing steadied did I get up. I searched for one of my father's short hairs on the pillow, then took it and left the bedroom. Early the next morning, I found an excuse to go out first and went to the hospital to collect Susan's hair. Then I submitted Susan's and my dad's hair samples, as well as Susan's and that meal delivery auntie's hair samples for paternity testing. After returning home, my mom and I set off for the hotel together. By noon, guests began arriving one after another. My father was originally recuperating in the hospital, but he stubbornly got up to attend my college celebration banquet. I had been somewhat worried he might cause a scene at the banquet, but my mother reassured me that my father was extremely vain by nature, which finally put me at ease. Just as my mother predicted, my father, who usually couldn't be bothered to spare me a glance, was now all smiles. His grin was so wide that even the bandages wrapped around his face couldn't contain it. "Old Smith, your daughter has really made something of herself. That's up to me." Someone, seeing his pitiful state, asked with concern, "What happened to you? How did you get hurt like this?" Darkness flickered in his deep eyes, yet my father's smile remained as bright as ever. I was just so happy my daughter got into Yale. I drank one too many and ended up like this." Hearing this, my mother and I exchanged glances, barely suppressing our laughter. I have to admit, he's quite good at making excuses for himself. This talent for talking nonsense with eyes wide open really found its perfect application. Wave after wave of guests entered, until finally, under my mother's eager anticipation, my maternal grandparents arrived. Back then, My maternal grandparents were angry because my mother stubbornly insisted on marrying my father. Over the years, though I've secretly helped my mom in her career, there's been almost no visible interaction between us. Every time my mom went back to visit them, they would put on stern faces. Only when facing me would the elderly couple show happiness, but deep down I knew, they were using me as an excuse to care about my mom. Their love for me was merely, love me, love my dog. Dad, Mom, you're finally here. My mother breathed a sigh of relief. My grandparents looked smug. If it weren't for making sure Diana's graduation celebration isn't lacking anything, we wouldn't have come. Yes, let me take you inside. My mother went to support my grandparents. All my classmates had arrived, along with the James family and Susan's entire family. As noon approached and nearly all the guests had gathered, I still hadn't caught sight of Bruce. Only then did I realize how presumptuous I'd been. I didn't know anything about Bruce's academic performance or which university he'd been admitted to, yet I'd gone ahead and invited him so rashly. Just as I was thinking, a familiar voice suddenly came from above. Excuse me, where should I sit? I looked up and met Bruce's beautiful eyes. I'll take you there. As I spoke, a smile involuntarily bloomed on my face. I took Bruce to the table where our high school classmates were seated. Seeing Bruce, the girls who had been chatting happily immediately blushed and fell silent. Hannah, you're amazing, you actually got the campus heartthrob who never gets close to anyone to come. Hearing this, I just smiled without saying anything. The Smith group wasn't small, and most of those attending my college celebration banquet were business partners. I followed my parents as they toasted everyone at the tables. When it came to the table where the James family was seated, someone voiced their confusion. Why are the in-laws sitting with us? My mother smiled and explained, well, Diana and Kevin's engagement has been called off. Their betrothal was just a casual joke made years ago, nothing serious. Everyone present was sharp enough to read between the lines, so no one pressed further. On the contrary, it was James's parents who were unhappy, but they held back and didn't voice their opinions. My mother wanted to save some face for the James family, but I didn't. How can one expect a dignified ending after doing such undignified things? What kind of world would that be? I looked at Susan, who was clutching her stomach with a conflicted expression, as if struggling over whether to reveal right then and there that she was carrying Kevin's child. Decisively, I strode toward Kevin standing not far from her. Halfway there, suddenly, my foot caught on something, sending me tumbling forward, and directly ahead of me was Susan. Just as I was about to crash into Susan, a sudden force pulled at my waist. It was Bruce. He had hooked his arm around my waist. Thank you, I said to him as I steadied myself in his arms. Susan, still shaken from the scare, exploded with anger. She clutched her stomach as she stood up from the chair, pointing at me accusingly. Diana, you did this on purpose. You just can't stand that I'm carrying Kevin's child and wanted to take this chance to get rid of my baby. Susan's words caused an uproar in the room. The crowd instantly understood. The reason I broke off my engagement with James Kevin was because he had been carrying on with my cousin, even getting her pregnant. Everyone present had their dignity, and many cast disdainful looks at the James family. Mr. and Mrs. James cared most about saving face. Mrs. James immediately denied it. Susan, what nonsense are you spouting? Our Kevin isn't someone you can just seduce whenever you please. At this point, Susan decided she had nothing left to lose. Auntie, deep down you know whether the child in my belly is Kevin's or not. If you really refuse to acknowledge it, we can always do a paternity test after the baby is born. You shameless slut, I'll tear your mouth to shreds. Seeing the James family and David Smith's family about to come to blows again, my mother directly had security throw both families out. The scene fell silent once more. The crowd's gazes toward me were now tinged with sympathy. Except, of course, for my father among them. His face was livid, his eyes looking as if they could devour me whole. The college celebration banquet had just ended when my father erupted the moment we got home. How could you mother and daughter be so vicious? Susan is already pitiful enough, pregnant with Kevin's child yet still not accepted by the James family. Must you drive her to her death? But doesn't she deserve this punishment? Diana, don't think I won't teach you a lesson. My father strode toward me with large steps. The security guards blocked my path, surrounding me tightly. If you don't want to end up hospitalized again from a beating, go ahead and try something. I knew you were no good. Enough. My mother couldn't take it anymore and cut off my father's words. Bob Smith, let's get divorced. Divorce? Rose, are you kidding me? My father's voice was full of shock and disdain. Clearly, in his mind, no matter how he treated my mother and me, She would never divorce him. Yes, divorce, my mother declared firmly. After taking a moment to process this, my father sneered coldly. Fine, let's divorce then. We'll split the assets 50-50. Why should we split it 50-50? What have you contributed to this family besides eating, drinking, and having fun? I protested. My mother, however, said, fine, I'll have the lawyer draft the agreement later. Then it's settled. After my father went upstairs, my mother turned to me and reassured, Diana, since we've decided to divorce, cutting the knot quickly is what matters most. Money can be earned again. Besides, he is still your father after all. Giving him some money isn't a big deal. My mother made a fair point, so I kept silent for the moment. Seeing that my mother was fine, I told her I was going out to meet classmates. In reality, I went to the hospital. Hopefully my guess was wrong. If so, to spare my mother too much grief, I could let Bob Smith have a share of the inheritance. At the hospital, I smoothly obtained the paternity test results. When I opened the report and saw the outcome, I was so furious I could barely breathe. I guessed right. Susan truly is the child of Bob Smith and that meal delivery auntie. I immediately took the appraisal results back to show my mom, who had been grieving over their decades-long marriage, was instantly consumed by rage upon discovering that the child my father had fathered through an affair was actually 3 years older than me. True to her character, even in anger, she didn't let rage cloud her judgment. She called my maternal grandparents. Tell them about this. My maternal grandparents came with my 3 uncles. My father, who was taking an afternoon nap, was dragged out of bed and beaten severely by my 3 uncles. Already injured, he was beaten to within an inch of his life. Then my eldest uncle placed a divorce agreement in front of him and told him to sign it. When my father saw that it stated he would leave with nothing, he absolutely refused to sign. My eldest uncle sneered, Bob Smith, think carefully. If you don't sign, I'll report you for bigamy tomorrow and have you thrown in jail. Not only that, but from now on, every time I see anyone from your Sioux family, I'll beat them up. None of you will ever have a chance to rise in this lifetime. Only then did my father, realizing Susan's affair had been exposed, sign his name with ashen defeat. At this moment, my parents officially divorced. From now on, he would no longer be my father. Bob Smith was thrown out of the villa like trash. I'm so furious. If it weren't for Diana's sake, I'd make sure he ends up in jail. The uncles were seething with anger. My mother set aside her own grief to comfort my grandparents and uncles. In the end, my grandparents and uncles couldn't bear to see my mother and me suffer, insisting we stay with them for a while. At my grandfather's house, I felt an unprecedented warmth, so warm that I never wanted to leave. My mother also thought the villa was unlucky and sold it below market price without hesitation. With over a month left before Yale University started, my mother asked me, "What are your plans next, Mom?" "I want to intern at the company, after dealing with the trash. Making money is what really matters. I need to learn how to manage the company early, so I can take over the family business." Hearing my answer, my mother smiled. Perfect, that's exactly what I had in mind. My mother took me to buy several sets of professional attire, dressed in business wear with my long hair tied up. The reflection in the mirror showed a confident, assertive me, no longer the timid person from my past life. The next day, I went to the company with my mother. I witnessed with my own eyes as my mother gave orders to the HR department to fire everyone Bob Smith had previously placed in the company. Soon, my mother's phone in the CEO's office was flooded with calls. "Sister-in-law, we're family after all. Bob Smith's despicable actions have nothing to do with me, sis. I've already cut ties with Bob Smith. Jobs are hard to come by these days. Could you spare me for old time's sake?" In the face of profit, Bob Smith's proud brotherhood proved fragile. Not wanting to waste time, my mom simply blocked all these people. My mom handed me over to a senior colleague at the company, and I had a lot to learn every day. Amidst this busy schedule, every single matter concerning the James family and David Smith's family still reached my ears. It's not that I want to hear about it, but the James family's scandals have been too numerous lately, becoming common knowledge throughout our social circle. After Susan publicly announced at my college celebration banquet that she was pregnant with Kevin's child, his parents, who felt utterly humiliated by Susan, ordered Kevin to cut off all contact with her, whether it was Kevin's deep affection or Susan's cunning methods. He actually continued seeing Susan behind his parents' backs. When James's mother accidentally discovered this, she was so furious she ended up hospitalized. Over at James Group, their disgraceful conduct ruined several major cooperative projects, resulting in devastating losses. Watching the company's stock price plummet day after day, Old man James was at his wit's end, but that wasn't all. As it turned out, Susan had no idea she was an illegitimate child who couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Upon learning that the meal-delivering aunt was her own mother, she furiously cursed Bob Smith and her birth mother for being shameless. In her rage, she directly miscarried the child in her womb. Without the child, Susan lost all chance of marrying into the James family. Her status within the Smith family plummeted drastically. She stopped being Tsundra and started coaxing Bob Smith again. After all, Bob Smith had money in his hands, back then. The reason Bob Smith signed the divorce papers with my mother so readily was firstly because he feared going to prison and was afraid of my uncles, and secondly because he had substantial private savings. But how could someone accustomed to luxury possibly endure watching his savings gradually dwindle? Under Sam Smith's deception, Bob Smith became addicted to gambling. Within just a month, millions were lost without a trace. Stripped of his wealth, Bob Smith could no longer curry favor with the Sue family and was driven out of their home. According to former neighbors at the villa, the disheveled and destitute Bob Smith came looking for me and my mother there. Unfortunately, the villa had long changed hands, and he found no one. Listening once more to others discussing those people's pitiful circumstances, I realized my heart remained largely unmoved. We've long belonged to different worlds, whether their future brings fortune or misfortune. I'll strive to become better and better. On Yale University's opening day, at the school gate, Kevin stopped me. Hannah, I've completely cut ties with Susan. We grew up together since childhood sweethearts. Can you forgive me just this once? The ridiculous thing was, I actually saw genuine affection in Kevin's eyes. Some people are just like that. They don't cherish what comes easily, yet covet what they can't have. Sorry. No forgiveness. Looking at Kevin for even a second longer feels like wasting my life. I walked straight past Kevin and entered the school grounds. A familiar figure came into view. It was Bruce. He was also holding an admission letter in his hand, as if waiting for me. Seeing me, he walked over and extended an invitation. Want to go register together? Okay. I nodded and walked side by side with Bruce. Let bygones be bygones. And fear not the future. I will eventually become the person I aspire to be. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.